Hello, everybody. Welcome to Chapter 3 of Unit 1. We're going to look at India today. Hooray! I'm just gonna make 3 of these in one day. That's the UHS grind set. Am I right, gamers? Gotta rise up. You gotta grind. You gotta get this metaphorical bread. All right, then. I honestly don't know where my life has led me to this point where I said UHS grind set in a video in which I'm going to talk about Hinduism and Buddhism. Yes. Today we are going to talk about religion in ancient India. We're kind of backtracking a little bit, going back to some time period in Unit 0, but these religious developments that we're going to talk about today will be extremely influential outside of not only in India, of course, but outside it as well. So we're going to look at these distinct religions that will be diffused across South and Southeast Asia. And we're going to look at the geographic reasons why that is. This is Crash Course History. Yes. So bell work on the screen. What do you already know about the Indian subcontinent, environmentally speaking? All right. So today is going to be a delve into religion in ancient India. We're going to look primarily at the 2 big religions emerging in India, Hinduism and Buddhism, but also Jainism too. Sorry. All right. So as we are talking about religion today, we are going to kind of learn how to establish how systems of belief and explain how systems of belief, i.e. religion, and their practice influence South and Southeastern Asian society over time. But as usual, geography. Let's look at geography. Well, India is unique in that we are going to have distinct geographic zones across this entire large subcontinent. The subcontinent of India, of course, includes modern-day Pakistan, it includes India, it includes Bhutan, it includes Bangladesh and Nepal. But let's look at the geography of the whole continent. So in the north, we largely are going to see this kind of mountainous region, of course, the Himalayas. We have we have desertish areas over here in modern-day Pakistan. We have arid parts in India. Below that, we have the Indo-Gangetic floodplain, so a series of river systems that do allow for rich agricultural production in the north. And then below that, we do have a system of mountains, but we also largely will see tropical rainforests. We are going to see a very humid and tropical climate in the south of India. But why is all this geography important for today? What does this have anything to do with Hinduism? Well, my friend, it has everything to do with Hinduism. Because these geographic differences are going to make it very difficult to make a unified political system on the Indian subcontinent. So we are going to see various kind of degrees of geographic isolation across this very geographically distinct subcontinent. And as such, we will see very distinct communities form who have their own distinct local, political, and religious traditions. But another impact of India's geography is that we are going to see the influence of the monsoon rains. The monsoon rains, of course, we have them here in the lovely state of, well, I'm not going to say that actually, here. Oh, I've already said UHS, and my name is in Tucson. Yes, we're in, what's the matter? No one watches this outside of some UHS students. You know, I guess the theme of today is regret and suffering. Anyway, we have the monsoon rains that are going to be very important in the environment of the Indian subcontinent. And they're important for 2 reasons. For one thing, we will have the ability to grow very unique crops in the south of India, especially. And these are including things like cash crops that include cotton and spices, i.e. pepper. So the environment of India allows for it to have unique economic forms of production, mostly of luxury goods that will be desired by other places in the Indian Ocean community. But the monsoons are also important in that they allow for maritime trade. The monsoons are predictable. You know when it's a good time to sail, you know when it's not a good time to sail. And that's going to be very important when we discuss this more in our second unit, but I'm introducing it now. But let's go back to history. Let's go back to, well, where we left off on the Indian subcontinent, the Indus River Valley civilization. Well, one of the explanations given for the Indus River Valley civilization's collapse is going to be the migration of nomadic groups of people known as the Indo-Europeans, also known as the Aryans. They come from a region of Central Asia known as the Caucasus. They're not, as John Green put it, prehistoric Nazis. Anyway, so we do have eventually by about 1500 BCE that we do have this migration of Indo-Europeans that will cross over the Indus River Valley and set up kingdoms across the Indian subcontinent. And this initial migration of the Indo-Europeans is going to introduce political, social, and cultural ideas. Because as the Indo-Europeans arrive into the Indian subcontinent, they're going to make and record their religious and political traditions in a series of oral traditions known as the Vedas. And the Vedas are eventually going to be written down and compiled into a religious text, into a religious holy book, the Vedas. And this, as we're going to see, is going to be the basis of one of the most prominent Indian religions of Hinduism. So with this introduction of the Indo-Europeans, they are going to bring with them their religious culture, their language as well. But we're also going to see the introduction of a form of writing known as Sanskrit. This is going to be the written basis for a lot of Indian languages going forward. But upon arriving in India, we do see these kingdoms looking for a way to organize such a geographically and culturally diverse Indian subcontinent. And they're going to do that by making up social structures to impose social order. And these social structures are going to be influenced by ideas of religion. So the most prominent of these new ideas is going to be the social organization of Indian society into the caste system. And the caste system essentially is this hierarchy you can see on this map right here, this graph right here, of where people fall into different parts of society. So your role, your obligation, belongs to what caste you are a part of. And you don't need to know the exact specifics of these different castes, but the castes are going to have a religious connotation as well as a social one. So we do have this very structured society that has its roots and basis philosophically in religion. And this concept of a religious hierarchy is known as the Varna. It includes these different groups of people in Indian society. But as you can see on the top right here on this graph, those on the top of the caste system, they're largely going to come from the Aryan groups of people. Initially, this is kind of a racial, skin color-based system, but it's going to transform into a religious idea. It's going to be very influential across Indian history. So it's an extremely hierarchical system. You can't marry outside of your caste. You can't marry outside your caste. You belong there till the day you die. There's also geographic limitations as well. Poor people, these untouchables, quote unquote, they live on the outside of Indian cities. They live on the outside of villages. But why is the caste system there in the first place? Well, it's to justify hierarchy and establish order, of course. Well, there is this feeling that because of the diversity of culture, there needs to be a single unified system of hierarchy where everyone belongs to a certain caste and has certain obligations and jobs. And speaking of organization of jobs, we do see that in the jati as well. Jati essentially is the division of Indian society based on professions. So families are essentially confined to certain jobs. For instance, your family could be silk merchants. Your family could be diamond merchants. That's where actually Gandhi, historically, that family comes from. I was about to ask if there are any questions, but I cannot answer them as this is recorded. So we have the introduction of this caste system, a system designed to impose order on such a disorganized, culturally and politically speaking, Indian subcontinent. But we also see the introduction of ideas of theology, ideas of religion. And these ideas of religion, in general, are referred to as Dharmic theology. And Dharmic theology is the basis for Hinduism. It's the basis for Buddhism as well. And it's something that will have aspects that are similar about these different religions. For one thing, one of the biggest is the idea of reincarnation, the idea that you will be reborn in the next life. That's an interesting idea, because where you are reborn in the next life, that has big caste system implications. So, how do you determine what caste you are born into, or if you stay in the same caste? Well, it's determined thanks to karma. Karma essentially is the collection of good or bad deeds. Those of you who have played Fallout before, you know this system. It's the system in which good or bad deeds are summed up all together. And if you have good karma, then you could advance into the next caste. You could move up a rank. If you have bad karma, you could move down. So this idea of karma in the caste system is designed to encourage the people to stay within their lanes, to stay within their obligations, to not rock the boat, so to say. However, it is allowing for a degree of social mobility. The only problem is you have to be dead before you can advance and be reborn in the next life. So we're not going to watch this video because you can watch it on your own time. This is John Green's video on Buddha and Ashoka. We're talking about the Buddha and Hindu aspect, the Hinduism aspect today. Nope. So you should be able to identify what religious and social ideas are being introduced into India during the Vedic Age, but also think about how is this similar and how is this different to other societies we've talked about. Give me 1 second. So I flipped around the order because it makes more chronological sense to talk about it this way. But the ideas that the Aryans are introducing to the Indian subcontinent will have long-lasting religious impacts. And most dramatically and most long-lasting is going to be the influence of these Vedic ideas into Hinduism. Hinduism is not a single religion, but it's a broad characterization of traditions that have similar religious customs, similar religious ideas, such as those of reincarnation and karma. And Hinduism is an extremely diverse religion. And that owes to the geographic distinctions across the Indian subcontinent. Because of this cultural isolation, because of this decentralized political and cultural system, the practices of Hinduism vary depending on who you ask and where you ask. How they practice Hinduism also varies depending on location. And Hinduism is really going to be this kind of blending of different traditions altogether. It's a blending of local customs. It's a blending of these Vedic ideas of dharma and karma and reincarnation and the caste system. It's a blending of some Buddhist ideas. We'll talk about Buddhism more in just a second. But part of the reason why it's not going to take off very well in India is that it's going to be kind of absorbed into Hinduism. Hinduism is extremely flexible, much like yoga. It is incorporating different religions oftentimes and viewing them kind of as just another form of Hinduism. So Buddhism is going to be viewed as just another form of Hinduism in India, and as such, it's not going to have a long-lasting impact there, while Hinduism does. But there are some things that do generally unite all Hindus, at least to a degree. So most people, and by people I mean scholars and historians, describe Hinduism as polytheistic, but that varies depending on who you ask. Because some Hindus might believe there's only one divine being, some Hindus believe there's upwards to 330 million. So really, this reflects that diverse culture, those diverse cultures across the Indian subcontinent. They'll have different forms of Hinduism depending on their local traditions because they are so geographically isolated. But another reason why there are considered to be so many gods in Hinduism is this concept of the avatar. And you might have heard of an avatar before because of some blue people. But an avatar in Hinduism essentially is a different manifestation of a god. So a god can have multiple forms, multiple avatars. One god could have an avatar for each aspect of their personality. And thus that increases the amount of gods, arguably. But in Hinduism, we are going to see the reinforcement of the caste system. The idea of caste as a religious concept will make its way across Hindu traditions. So the point of Hinduism is to follow good karma and to lead a life in which you respect your position on the social hierarchy. So there very much is this rigid caste system that's justified and supported by these Hindu customs, by these Hindu religions. And we'll get back to this graph in just a second, but essentially it's comparing Hinduism with Buddhism, that we'll talk about next. But Hinduism, much like Buddhism, will spread throughout South and Southeast Asia. Hinduism, as a political and social idea, will be incorporated into the whole of the Indian subcontinent, but it's also going to spread and make unique cultural expressions in places like Indonesia, which is in the middle right there. It will also include places like the Khmer Empire, which we'll talk about in our next presentation. All right, well, in chapter 6, I believe. Or no, chapter 5. So this video kind of goes on to why Hinduism will kind of absorb Buddhism. This video is about Hinduism. So consider, how is the geography, how is the environment of the Indian subcontinent leading to different religious groups? How is it leading to different cultural traditions? How is it leading to the caste system? So the caste system hierarchy of Hinduism that's supported by this Vedic traditions, by these Dharmic traditions, that's largely going to be rejected in other religions that will pop up on the Indian subcontinent. And one of the earliest is a religion known as Jainism. Jainism stresses three things. For one thing, it stresses the idea of non-violence. And this is interesting because it's going to be very radical in its insistence on non-violence. It's going to be opposed to governments using violence. It's opposed to a warrior caste existing. It's also opposed to things like eating meat, eating animals. It's extreme non-violence, not only by oneself, but rejecting non-violence and encouraging governments not to engage in violent actions either. Some other practices of Jainism that are unique and are kind of reactions against the hierarchy of the caste system. Well, for one thing, there is no caste system. But we're going to see a rejection of materialism. We're seeing a rejection of the accumulation of wealth by higher castes. And that is best expressed through the idea of asceticism. Asceticism is a rejection of intense material possessions, of materialism. It's a rejection against kind of material culture in general. So it includes fasting, it includes practices like fasting. Jains oftentimes don't eat food that is not offered to them by someone else. So it's a way for spiritual enlightenment, as oftentimes these fasting moments are going to be accompanied by meditation sessions, but it's also a way to kind of politically critique and economically critique all of this wealth held by upper castes in Indian society. Another practice of Jainism is going to be the rejection of secular society as in general. It's going to be this idea of monasticism, of secluding oneself outside the secular or religious world. But the more long-lasting religion that will be opposed to the hierarchies of Hinduism is Buddhism. Because Buddhism, much like Jainism, will not have the caste system. It will not believe in that. And it will also critique that materialism, that wealth hoarding by upper castes in Indian society. So let's look at Buddhism. Well, Buddhism is historically and traditionally said to be founded by a man by the name of Siddhartha Gautama, otherwise known as the Buddha. And initially, he's a prince. He's a guy who lives in the upper castes. He belongs to that warrior caste. He's a prince, and he's not really going to go outside the palace walls until one day in his youth, he decides to escape. And when he escapes, he sees the horrors of the world. He sees poverty. He sees death. He sees sickness. And he's so disgusted by his place on the hierarchy, on the caste hierarchy, that he's going to leave his life of luxury and comfort, and he's going to adopt ascetic practices. He is going to meditate for a long time under a tree. He's going to deprive himself of food to focus on spiritual enlightenment. And indeed, eventually, after this meditation session, he comes to the understanding of the spiritual world around him. And he discovers what is known as the middle path. And the middle path essentially is this rejection of extreme asceticism that the Jains are arguing for, but it's also a rejection of this caste-based hierarchy in favor of a more equitable society in which we focus less on the needs of the community and more on individual enlightenment, individual religious and spiritual fulfillment. So the Buddha is going to have a few teachings that he will teach to his followers. Well, for one thing, he is going to say that the goal of life, the goal of Hinduism in general, is that you should be able to achieve nirvana. You should be able to achieve the classic 90s grunge band from Seattle. No, just kidding. You should be able to achieve a state known as nirvana. And nirvana essentially is a state of spiritual understanding, of enlightenment of the rest of the world. And that's what the Buddha, that's what he's achieved. He became the Buddha, or the enlightened. And nirvana has the aspect that upon realizing spiritual fulfillment, that you won't be reborn in the reincarnation system. So upon achieving enlightenment, upon achieving nirvana, you're no longer required to be in this life and death process, this process of rebirth. But how do you achieve enlightenment? Well, that's a big question. Well, we are going to see that in order to achieve enlightenment, you have to embrace what are known as the Four Noble Truths. And you don't need to know specifically what they are. Let's just take a look at the Four Noble Truths in general. Well, in order to achieve enlightenment, you have to first recognize that all life is suffering. And we all know life is suffering. But why and what is the cause of suffering? The cause of suffering is desire. Oh no, he found out that all suffering is inherently linked to desire. He mad. So realizing that suffering comes from desire is a good step in achieving enlightenment. But in order to eliminate desire, you have to follow what is known as the Eightfold Path. And the Eightfold Path essentially kind of describes how you should behave as a Buddhist. You should not intentionally harm others with speech or action. You should do what is right for the community. And you should reflect internally and spiritually on yourself. You should achieve enlightenment through things like meditation, through rituals like yoga. You have to control your thoughts. You have to be kind of like a Jedi in a way. I hate that. I don't want to apply these like Western, concepts, science fiction concepts like Jediism to Buddhism. But George Lucas actually, he is inspired by Buddhism and East Asian religion in general. But essentially, you have to do good. You have to be of good mind. It's a idea that will manifest itself in nonviolence as well. Oftentimes, Buddhists are nonviolent and will preach nonviolence. But the ideas of Buddhism are going to kind of become more complicated as they spread outside of India. So as we mentioned earlier, Buddhism is going to be incorporated into Hinduism, and that's culturally why it's not really found there. But we're going to see Buddhism take on its own unique form as it spreads across East Asia. And we'll talk about at least two of these branches, Mahayana Buddhism and Theravada Buddhism. So Buddhism is going to break up into different branches depending on where it's spreading to. But that is going to actually be something that's similar about all these branches in the sense that Buddhists are heavily dependent on missionary activity. They will have monasteries, as we saw in Tong, China. So these Buddhists are going to spread their faith through monasteries that train missionaries. But as Buddhists spread, their religion is going to become different depending on the location of where that religion is. So one of the branches of Buddhism is a very general branch known as Mahayana Buddhism. This actually also includes this V1 right here, Vajrayana Buddhism. But essentially, Mahayana Buddhism is going to be more focused on establishing a divine pantheon. It is more focused on establishing a spiritual divine world. So Mahayana Buddhists, they oftentimes incorporate local polytheistic traditions. They will incorporate the cult of ancestors, for instance, in China. And Mahayana Buddhists, they believe that the Buddha is a god, and that there are multiple gods that make up the Buddhist pantheon. We also have spiritual figures known as Bodhisattvas. And essentially, these are saint-like figures who have achieved enlightenment. They've achieved nirvana. They don't need to be reborn, but they choose to come back anyway to act as religious guides for others to achieve nirvana. So there's more of a willingness to have these rituals, these ceremonies, like sainthood, like godhood. And this is going to be a big deal really across all of East Asia, or at least most of East Asia. We're going to see this very big in China. We're going to see this very big in Japan and Korea. We're going to see it big in Central Asia. So we do see that as Buddhism spreads, it is going to incorporate local traditions into its theology. Another branch of Mahayana Buddhism, so a subsection of this branch of Buddhism, is known as Zen Buddhism. You might have heard of the term Zen before. Raise your hand if you heard the term Zen before. No? Okay. Well, Zen Buddhism is going to be very big among elites in Chinese and Japanese society, and it's one that encourages spiritual practices like meditation, like yoga. It appreciates the natural world. It's all about harmony. It's blending ideas of Taoism, you could say, into Buddhism. So that's why it's going to be pretty big in places like China. So we do see kind of this idea of achieving inner peace through meditation, achieving this idea of Zen through meditation. You see it in this, I don't know why I did that. You see it right here in this Buddhist meditation hall in Japan, I believe. And then you see this Japanese art right here of a man doing yoga. The other big branch of Buddhism is known as Theravada Buddhism. This is going to be a branch of Buddhism that's less focused on the divine or spiritual world and more on the idea of meditation as a form of individual enlightenment in following the practices of the OG Buddha. There's multiple Buddhas. The Buddha is Siddhartha Gautama, but Buddha can be any figure that achieves enlightenment, that achieves nirvana. So Theravada Buddhism is going to be pretty big in places like Sri Lanka and in Southeast Asia. And we'll talk about Southeast Asia more in our 5th chapter. But considering how Jainism and Buddhism, how they have their own theologies, how they have their own religious teachings, how might they be viewed as threats? Consider the fact, when you're answering this question, that Jains and Buddhists don't believe in the caste system. They are non-violent religions. They do reject materialism and wealth from the upper castes. So think about these things, that these are challenges to the social hierarchy of Indian society. So that's all I have for today, my friends, at least in terms of this chapter. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you have a great day. Time to do chapter 4. All right. Peace, love, rock and roll in the free world. That's the wrong way. Well, it doesn't matter. God bless everyone. Bye.